It was a dark night, and a ginger-haired man was on his way home from working so late. The streets were empty, and he had a journey ahead of him. Seeing as he missed all the late buses and the trains were closed, he was left with no other option than to walk. He decided to take the back streets home. It was eerily quiet tonight. The moon was hidden, not guiding anyone's path tonight. With a sigh, he walked into the dark passage, not noticing the intense glowing blue eyes following his movement. As he descended deeper through the alley, the more the glowing eyes began to fade into the thick mist. The short man stopped and bent over to tie his shoe. All the while a cat mysteriously appeared before him, waiting to be spotted to begin. Once he was finished, he stood up and was slightly startled from seeing this creature before him. There it stood, a very naked cat, it seems. He or she stood tall and proud in this dingy alleyway. He continued to look on curiously. The cat looked to be fully grown, dark grey, with vibrant blue eyes that seemed to be peering into his very being. Cautiously he walked over with paced steps, so as to not frighten this mystical beauty away. Upon closer inspection, he saw it had a black satin collar, encrusted with varying jewels and rupees on it. He couldn't even begin to fathom how much this thing cost, let alone how much the naked cat is worth. The ginger-haired man reached his hand out for the cat to smell, essentially introducing himself before going to pet it. The human couldn't tell, but the feline was quite displeased and began to grow irritated with the human quickly. It meowed. The ginger man looked down at the cat once more, a toothy smile gracing his face upon noticing there was no tag on the collar. Although he did think it was a little strange that an expensive hairless cat with an expensive-looking collar on was sitting in a dirty alleyway in the city. "Oh, well, no tag. Looks like it's a stray," he declared, shrugging his shoulders. He looked around to see if anyone was miraculously going to appear out of nowhere and claim the mysteriously alluring alley cat. "I shall name you Snuffles," the ginger said cheerily, looking back down at the cat, staring at the collar intently, as if he was in a trance. He reached for it. Suddenly the cat scurried off, shaking him out of his stupor. He shook his head as if that would help somehow. Still in a disorienting state, he began to chase after Snuffles. He ran straight, following the noises he was hearing. Left. There was another meow, right, and left again, leaving little time for him to question things. He didn't want to lose sight. He suddenly stopped. The daze he was in quickly dissipated, and he began to take in his surroundings. Meow, he heard in the distance. He looked around. Snuffles was nowhere in sight. He's in an alleyway with a dingy dumpster and trash everywhere. The floor was covered in a substance that definitely was not water. Reaching down to examine it, the substance casted a weird smell into the air. The substance was thick, and a dark crimson colour tinged with gold flakes in it. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but it was familiar, unpleasant, but familiar. Feeling uneasy, he stood up and stumbled forward to investigate the light source. Hoping that the further away he got, maybe the pit in his stomach would lessen. Had he peered back, the ginger human would have seen the glowing eyes that began to appear little by little in the darkness of the strange alleyway following along his travelled path. "Snuffles!" he called out, hoping for a sign. With a sigh he walked forward until he heard a crash in the distance. Hope ran through him as he ran off in the direction of the sound. Making twists and turns seems to still have led him to the alleyway with the light again. However, this time Snuffles was there. He was at the end of the alleyway next to some candles. Without much thought, he quickly jogged towards Snuffles. Perhaps a little too quickly, because when he tried to slow down, he tripped forward, landing in front of what must be the source of what he was smelling earlier. It was a metallic smell and looked pretty dark. It was all brushed across the concrete in an intricate pattern. Looking up, he made eye contact with glowing, beady eyes. Every time he blinked, it felt as if more and more appeared out of the darkness. He quickly rose to his feet in a defensive position and began looking for a way out of here. Candles, glowing-eyed, creepy cats, a weird substance on the floor, and a dumpster, but no exit. How was he supposed to escape? What was going on? The ginger human looked up briefly to see that it was Snuffles, his saviour. Thank God. Snuffles stalked forward. He looked different this time. His eyes were dark, almost black. There appeared to be what looked like small bumps, maybe ears on his forehead. Snuffles let out a hiss. He looked almost predatory if he wasn't such an adorable cat. The human stupidly stood there in awe as the feline approached. The closer he got, the more apparent it became that something was not right. The ground rumbled slightly. Ripples in the dark puddles nearby formed from the slight movement. It seemed as if time began to slow down, and the shadows began to swallow the surroundings, and the candles began to dim. The air stilled, and small pebbles began to float as a rift opened up beneath the little ginger-haired human on the floor and swallowed him whole. Forever to be missing, all for a greater purpose. The rip closed up, and the pebbles that rose fell back into place on the cold ground. A heavy mist began to roll in. The air seemed to flow again, and the candles went out. Soft purrs were left in their stead as the cats began to disappear little by little into the thick mist. All that was there was the mysterious Snuffles, happily licking its paw with contentment. Purrs vibrating throughout his body, and the full moon that glowed through the heavy fog. Ben took the same path to and from work every day. From the door to his trailer, he walked on the loose gravel parking lot to the bike path through Mechant Lake Forest Preserve. The path was a 4-mile loop, but Ben only used a mile-long stretch along the east side. Once he got as far south on the path as he could, he trudged through some wild grass and low shrubs for about 50 feet until he emerged on the back lot of Cletus's auto shop. Ben did oil changes and a few other basic services, but was not allowed to operate the hydraulic jacks. On a warm Thursday evening, when he arrived back at his trailer, there was a red children's book leaning against his screen door. A thin hardcover with the picture of a dusty grey British short-hair cat on the front. The title was Felix and the Hidden Treasure. Ben hated cats. Just seeing the cover of this book enraged him. He kicked it aside, reminiscing about the many cats he had kicked at on the path to and from work all these years. The book came to a rest next to the metal stairs, open to the last page. Felix sat on a pile of coins and treasure underneath a shady chestnut tree. The way Felix looked at him, that's what intrigued Ben. He glanced at the book, took a step up, then stopped. Against his initial instinct to avoid reading at all costs, Ben bent over and scooped up the book. Inside his trailer, he plopped down on a heavily duct-taped lounge chair that used to be black leather. Opening the book made him feel like a kid again when nobody read to him. In second grade, he used to pick the books with the most pictures when his class went to the library and make up a story of his own, since he still couldn't read. Forgetting to even change out of his greasy overalls, Ben turned to the first page. Felix the cat stood at the beginning of a path, just like the bike path Ben walked to work every day. It even had the orange stripe down the middle. Felix looked over his shoulder, beckoning the reader to come on an adventure with him. Come with me to a treasure that awaits. Perhaps we'll see those pearly gates. Astonished at the picture on page 2, Ben felt a sense of déjà vu as his eyes fell upon Felix walking past a rusty gate hanging askew on an equally rusty white metal fence. Behind the fence was a junkyard. The very same junkyard Ben passed every day. It even had the same blue 1970 Chevy on blocks heavily rusted. As if mesmerized, Ben turned the page. Just up ahead, painted the color blue, a run-down shed for me and you. Ben's eyes bulged as he remembered the blue shed he passed every day just a bit further down from the junkyard. It was a flimsy tin structure, barely standing. But it was blue. The white doors had failed over the years, and now it just sat open. Ben purposely took a wide berth after coming across an angry mother cat and her kittens inside one time. Felix urged Ben on farther. On the next page, he could see Felix regarding a pair of elm trees arching over the path. Ben shook his head in disbelief. He knew those trees. They were just a bit farther down from the broken-down shed, and they formed a little shady arch over the path which he enjoyed most during the summer months. Let's take a rest, a pause for a sec. What's next in this test? will make you a wreck. Immersed in the journey, Ben let the world around him slip away. He could almost see Felix walking on his path, guiding him towards something. On the next page, Felix stood in front of an old water pump Ben knew well. It was exactly halfway between the start of his daily walk and when he got to the back lot of the garage he worked at. Felix had a raised paw, pointing at a well-hidden dirt path carved subtly into the lush wild grasses. Ben's mouth hung open as he turned to his right in his imagination. This time of year he would have to duck through the dense forest. Thick branches would wick at his shoulders and head, but he could be careful. Just a bit more, not to worry. The journey afore, now you have to hurry. Felix led Ben through a maze of flowering bushes and lush green grasses, the winding path no longer familiar as it strayed from the paved bike path, but promised something glorious. Eager to reach the end, Ben turned to the next page. There was Felix, looking over his shoulder, making sure Ben kept up. There was a small grassy clearing, and the dirt path ended. A circle of tall white pines enshrouded the cosy nook. Almost there now, time to stretch a leg. Worthwhile, I vow, riches you will beg. Felix continued across the clearing and onto a new dirt path that led deeper into the evergreens. Ben had an idea if this part of the forest preserve actually existed along his path, but he was dying to find out. As Ben turned to the final page, he saw Felix's little cat face turned toward the reader. He wore a grin, his paws outstretched. In a sweeping gesture, Felix drew Ben's attention to another small clearing just beyond the trees. The dirt path ended at the base of a mountain of coins and jewels. A treasure chest sat open, overflowing with stacks of bills and gold coins. A promised treasure, I cannot lie. Value no measure, so much you will die. Closing the book with an audible pop, Ben jumped up and ran to the front door. He pushed the screen, slamming it against the side of his trailer. Giggling like an idiot, he shuffled along the gravel, kicking little puffs of white dust into the air. As he approached the bike path, he held the book open to the first page. Looking down with the book in front of him, the path was an exact duplicate in the book. Ben walked hastily to the first landmark, almost seeing Felix actually walking in front of him. With a scowl, Ben wished Felix was there. He would toss him into the trunk of that old Chevy in the junkyard if he was. As he passed the rusty gate, Ben smiled, remembering the time last summer when he brought a super soaker with him and blasted the trio of orange stray cats with gasoline. They ran away, hissing and screaming at him, but he got them good. He wondered how long it took them to lose the stench of the fuel caked on their fur. Farther down now, Ben approached the shed. He turned the page in the book, using it as a map. He closed his eyes and saw Felix in his mind, acknowledging the shed just like in the book. With a chuckle, Ben thought back to the time he found a mother cat with her litter of newborn kittens in the shed. It was drizzling that day, and the raindrops pattered at the metal roof with a pleasant beat. It was early July then, and a rush surged through him as he relived lighting a 10-pack of firecrackers and tossing them into the shed, then slamming the doors shut. The racket the cats made was like sweet music to Ben's ears as it mixed with the pop of the firecrackers. A few minutes farther down the path, Ben came to the arched elms. Just like in the book, they provided shade from the heavy summer sun. He took a moment to rest and recalled that time in the fall 2 years earlier when he came across 2 fat grey strays, one with a striped tail, the other with a black one. They lumbered slowly on that hot day, seemingly dehydrated from the unusual October heat. Ben laughed to himself, remembering firing rocks at the 2 cats from the shade of the elms. He never hit them, but came close a few times. They scampered off before he could do any real damage. Moving on, Ben turned the page in the book to where Felix stood at the water pump. Ben put his hand on the pump, marveling at the accuracy of the book. Who wrote this amazing tome? Someone who wanted Ben to have the treasure, that's who. Before turning toward the little dirt path hidden from unobservant eyes, Ben thought about the time last winter when he came across a little black kitten, shivering in the frozen air. He picked up the kitten with a comforting tone, petting and reassuring him he would take him somewhere warm. When he got to the end of the path, where a small pond had frozen over, his tone changed. Ben stomped the ice until his steel-toed boot broke through to liquid water. With a snarl, he dropped the kitten into the freezing water, then headed in to work. To this day, he still has no idea what happened to that little black kitten. Just as in the book, there was a little dirt path heading at a right angle away from the paved bike path. Ben ducked under some low-hanging branches and crept greedily toward his destination. With the book as his map, he emerged onto a clearing. The whole time, Felix egged him on. Ben could almost see Felix on the path before him, just like in the story. He quickly paced across the clearing and into the dense forest. This summer had been particularly wet, making the trees and grasses and shrubs extra lush. Spines from sticker bushes scraped at his legs. Heavy branches with soft pine needles slapped at his head and neck. His back ached as he lunged forward, hunched over, but he pushed farther ahead. Surely the treasures that awaited him were close now. Like a doorway, two majestic cypress trees stood side by side, giving just enough space for a man to slip between. The branches just above his head hung over, completing the doorway illusion. With an eagerness he hadn't felt since he was a child, Ben stumbled into another small clearing. Only, instead of a mountain of jewels and coins and treasure, he saw cats. Lots of cats. He found himself in the middle of a vicious circle of hissing felines. They closed the space behind him, cutting off his only escape. There were orange ones with long, spindly tails, and grey ones with striped tails, a trio of black cats with piercing green eyes, and a white one with pointy pink ears. Their colours ranged all points on the rainbow, but they had one thing in common: Ben's wrath. Their little faces were vaguely familiar, but who can really remember every cat they assaulted? They were all there. Amber, the one he threw firecrackers at, and her 3 babies, Jester, Joker, and King, and Sophia, the British short-hair, and Oscar, and Pharaoh, and Lady, and Dot, the one he tossed into the freezing water, Ebony, and there was Frisia, the one he doused in gasoline, and all the others, the ones he assaulted every chance he got, the kings and queens of this jungle. Closing in around him, Ben shuddered in terror. Before he could register what was about to happen, they were on him. Moving like lightning, they clawed at his face, his neck, his skin. One jumped on his head and clawed his right eye out with a triumphant meow. Dozens clung to his body, their claws piercing his skin. He spun with a wail, but it went unheard. They were at least a mile from civilization. Deep in this dense forest, blood oozed from countless wounds, and the cats continued to ravage him. Ben fell to the ground in a tortured hump. Pain seared through every inch of his body, down to the bone. Screams and hisses and scratches and claws and bites and cries and pain. The assault lasted long past the time Ben's mind could register pain, but the time he could feel pain was an eternity. 3 days later, police investigated a missing persons report filed by Ben's employer. When they found him, they said his body looked like ground beef, unrecognizable, and Felix grinned. The sun was beating relentlessly on the old cobblestone streets of the city when the stray cat appeared out of the shadows. It was a small, scruffy feline, its fur dyed a dull grey. Its eyes were a deep yellow, and they seemed to be dancing in the fading light that surrounded it. It stared at the girl for a few seconds, and then continued on its way. She followed the cat, winding through the narrow alleys and passages of the old part of the city. There was something about that animal that urged her to go after it, and she did so without even considering any other possibility. The cat meowed softly, looking back from time to time as if it wanted to make sure that she was chasing it. The girl looked around, not knowing what to do. Despite the fear and confusion that was starting to rise within her, she felt a strange kind of excitement that urged her to continue on the trail marked by her peculiar companion. The cat led the girl through winding streets and alleyways, and soon they were in a completely unfamiliar part of the town. She felt a shiver run up and down her spine, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she kept her gaze focused on the cat's tail, which swayed slightly as they walked. Concentrating on it helped her not to get carried away by her thoughts. The cat eventually stopped in front of an old abandoned building, and the girl felt her heart skip a beat. She looked up at the roof, which seemed to tear the sky. The walls were on the verge of crumbling and were shrouded in a gloom that gave her great apprehension. She approached the door slowly, full of intrigue. Then she stretched her small hand towards the doorknob and then withdrew it. She had no idea what was on the other side, but she knew it was something important. So she took a deep breath, reached out again and opened the door. The cat meowed softly and stepped back, as if to encourage her to follow. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door and stepped forward to enter a large room decorated with intricate tapestries and filled with empty bookshelves and furniture covered with sheets. She shifted her gaze across the mysterious and wondrous objects that filled the room. In the center was a large table with a single chair just opposite the entrance. The cat meowed softly, and the girl felt a sense of anticipation as she sat in the chair. The room was filled with an almost palpable sense of magic. It was as if she was on the threshold of something wonderful. She waited with bated breath, unsure of what would come next. The cat meowed again and ran to a large, ornate mirror resting in the corner. The girl followed it curiously, her heart thumping wildly in her chest. The cat stared at the mirror as if it wanted to tell the girl something. She stood next to it and saw her own reflection, her long black hair, her green eyes, and her pale skin. She saw something else besides. In the mirror there was ancient furniture and bookshelves full of books. She saw that she was sitting at a large table with a chair opposite the entrance, just as she had been a few minutes before. She saw the cat approaching and staring at her inside the mirror, meowing softly. She gasped and put her hand over her mouth. It could not be. At that moment, another figure appeared in the mirror, only slightly distorted. It was her, but with different clothes. "Hello," said the girl with a shiver. "Who are you?" "Hello," the girl in the mirror replied. Her voice was soft and soothing, and her eyes were cold. Her gaze was stern. "Am I dead?" asked the girl, uncertainly. From within the reflection, a large woman appeared, wearing a long lace-black dress, with a red gem in the middle of her forehead. She had black hair and piercing green eyes. Her skin was pale, almost transparent, and her lips were so red they seemed to be bleeding. "No, not yet," the woman spoke in a husky alto voice. "But you soon will be. My name is—" The girl paused, unsure how she should introduce herself. My name is—" "I know what your name is, Karen. I can see your reflection in my mirror," the woman said with a thin smile. The girl wanted to scream, to run away, but she couldn't. She was paralyzed with fear, frozen in place. Her eyes were open wide. Her mouth was open like a gaping hole. "You have a gift, child," spoke the woman with a wicked smile that twisted her lips. "You have a power that is rare, even amongst our kind." The girl in the mirror blushed and looked down. "It's silly, really." "Oh, no," the woman said with a hiss. "It does not seem silly to me. In fact, it is quite interesting, especially since you are reflected in my mirror. I must admit I am intrigued." "What is this power?" asked the girl, curious. The woman's smile widened and she walked around the table, approaching the girl. "You have a gift, child," she repeated, "and I am going to teach you how to use it." The woman leaned over and whispered into the girl's ear. The girl closed her eyes and breathed in, her heart racing. She felt something strange, as if something had stuck to her skin. "Do you understand?" asked the woman. The girl nodded, still holding her breath. "Good. Now open your eyes." She did as she was told, and saw her own reflection in the mirror. It was her, but it was not. Her face was pale, whiter than it had ever been, and her eyes were black, as if she were dead. Her hands were covered in blood and her clothes were torn. She moved one of her hands and felt a strand of her long black hair fall across her face. She raised her hand to brush it off, and the motion of her hand made it seem as if she was about to touch herself. "What did you do to me?" she asked, terrified. "I showed you how to become one of us," the woman replied. "I taught you to use your gift." "One of you?" asked the girl. The woman nodded. "Yes, you have a rare gift, child. You can step in and out of mirrors, and what you see there is not exactly what is real." "What do you mean?" the girl asked, her voice trembling. "Well, let me put it this way. You can go into the mirror, and you can come out of this mirror. But what is on the other side of the mirror might not be exactly what you see here." The girl nodded, her eyes wide, her hand on her mouth. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you do this to me?" The cat leapt with agility, landing on the girl's frail shoulder, where it pressed its sleek body against her neck. The woman's gaze hardened, and the light in her eyes sent a ripple across the mirror, causing her reflection to crawl back into the deepest corner of the room, as if it were afraid of her. "I gave you a gift," she said with a low hiss. "I gave you the power to become invisible, to hide in the shadows, to hear the secrets of people and use them in your favor. I gave you the power to be more than you could ever be in life. That is why I brought you here, to show you the way." "I don't want," said the girl, a pleading look in her eyes. "You don't have a choice," replied the woman sharply. "This is what you are. You are a being of the night, of the shadows. You are a being of magic, of mystery and power." "I don't want," repeated the girl. The woman growled and grabbed her tightly by the throat and pressed her nails into her skin. The girl let out a scream, a high-pitched, tense scream which rattled the walls. The cat bristled on her shoulders and leapt at the woman, smashing through the mirror and knocking her to the floor. As she fell, the cat jumped up and ran to the corner where the girl's reflection was and, meowing softly, lay in her lap. The mirror glass shattered into 1,000 pieces, cracking the girl's skin at some points while the blood from the woman's forehead dripped down the rest of the glass, covering it with a thick red layer. The girl stood up, her face pale and her hands trembling. She felt pain but did not know what it was. She heard a moan but did not know where it came from. He was breathing, but he did not know why. She felt something in her chest, something throbbing, something shifting and moving, and something calling to her. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them, she was back in the room with the mirror. In front of her, the scattered panes of glass from the mirror crackled on the floor, and there was no trace of the dark woman left. Then she felt a faint meow. She turned her head, and next to the door found the cat, who was quietly watching her, then turned and walked out the door. Again she followed its steps. The sun had disappeared, and a full moon illuminated the dark roads. The cat was not there. It was raining.